The moon hung like a wound against the black, its surface scarred by ancient bombardments and geological fury that had never stilled. Karos III occupied the farthest edge of the outer rim, a place where hyperspace lanes frayed into uncharted space and the Republic's light dimmed to a memory. Its atmosphere churned with sulfuric storms, and its valleys glowed with veins of molten rock that pulsed like exposed arteries. Few came here willingly. Miners extracted rare isotopes from the thermal vents. Smugglers hid their ships in the maze of obsidian canyons. The moon existed in that liminal space between civilization and void, where the galaxy's rules grew soft and negotiable. But on this night, something fell from the stars that belonged to neither category. The impact crater measured 300 meters across, a perfect circle of glassed stone radiating heat signatures that confused every scanner in the system. The seismic shock registered on Republic monitoring stations 2 systems away. Within the crater's heart, surrounded by cooling magma and shattered bedrock, lay a capsule of unknown origin. Its hull bore no Imperial markings, no Republic insignia, no script from any known language. The metal itself seemed to reject analysis, shimmering with a faint green luminescence that pulsed in rhythm with something biological. Inside, a figure stirred. The capsule door exploded outward with force enough to vaporize the surrounding rock face. Steam hissed into the toxic air. A shape emerged, silhouetted against the crater's dying glow. Massive shoulders. Arms corded with muscle that seemed sculpted from raw physical dominance. Hair that defied gravity, rising in a wild crown of black spikes. And around him, an aura that made the very air scream. Broly opened his eyes to an alien sky. His breathing came in deep, controlled cycles, each exhalation creating visible pressure waves in the atmosphere. He stood 9 feet tall, his frame wrapped in tattered armor that barely contained the power radiating from every cell. Green energy flickered across his skin like bioelectric lightning. His eyes, when they focused, held a quality beyond mere aggression. They held confusion, pain, and beneath both, a furnace of rage that had burned since before memory. The Force recoiled. Across the galaxy, sensitive souls gasped and clutched at their chests. Jedi meditation circles broke apart as masters steadied themselves against sudden vertigo. In the temple on Coruscant, the ancient Kyber crystals hummed with discordant frequencies, and in the Chamber of Judgment, Mace Windu's meditation shattered like dropped glass. He knew, with the certainty of 1,000 visions and the weight of Varpad flowing through his veins, that something unprecedented had entered the galaxy, something the Force itself did not understand. Broly took his first step onto Karos III's surface, and the ground cracked beneath his boot. His head tilted, processing sensory input from a world that registered as both solid and impossibly fragile. Everything here felt thin, breakable. The mountains that loomed in the distance seemed like props. The storms overhead, for all their violence, carried no real threat. He raised one hand, watching the green ki energy dance between his fingers, and felt the disconnect between his power and this reality's fundamental construction. Where was he? The question should have been simple. But Broly's mind, fractured by the control crown his father had wielded and the trauma of a life lived as a weapon, could not process abstract thought without triggering the rage. His earliest memory was pain. His second memory was his father's fear. Every moment since had been battle, containment, battle again. He had been born with power that exceeded understanding, and that power had defined every interaction, every relationship, every possibility of who he might become. The Force reached toward him tentatively, curiously, the way light probes the edges of a new prism. Broly's aura flared in response, not defensively, not aggressively, simply reflexively, the way a star burns because fusion is its nature. The Force withdrew, not repelled but uncertain. It found no darkness in him, but no light either. It found no intention, no philosophy, no alignment with the cosmic balance that defined its metaphysics. It found only power, raw, absolute. and entirely disconnected from the framework through which the Force understood consciousness. In the obsidian canyons below, a camp of salvagers detected the thermal spike. They gathered their weapons and their nerve, expecting perhaps a crashed Republic vessel or an Imperial probe. What they found instead would become legend, though none of them would survive to tell it firsthand. Broly walked. His path took him down the crater's slope and into the valley network where bioluminescent fungi cast everything in sickly blue light. He moved with surprising grace for his size, each step measured, his posture neither threatening nor defensive, but his presence warped the environment. Plants withered as he passed, stone cracked. The air itself seemed to compress under the weight of his existence. The salvagers saw him from their perch atop a mineral processor, 12 beings from 6 species, all veterans of the Rim's harsh economy. They raised blasters, shock rifles, even an old Clone Wars-era repeater. Their leader, a Weequay named Skaros, shouted a challenge in Huttese, demanding identification and intention. Broly stopped, his head turned toward the sound. His eyes, dark in their neutral state, focused on the tiny figures with their tiny weapons. He did not understand the words, but he understood the posture, the fear masked as aggression, the preparation for violence. Something in his chest tightened. A memory fragment. His father. The crown. The command to destroy, always to destroy, because that was safety, that was control, that was the only relationship his power could have with anything living. The green aura began to expand. Skaros fired first. The blaster bolt crossed the 100 meters between them in a microsecond, a coherent packet of energy sufficient to punch through durasteel. It struck Broly's chest and dissolved into light. The Saiyan warrior did not flinch, did not even acknowledge the impact. The bolt might as well have been rain. The other salvagers opened fire. Energy weapons painted the valley in colors of violence. The repeater cannons' depleted uranium rounds created a sound like tearing metal. Shock charges filled the air with ozone. And Broly stood at the center of the storm, untouched, his aura absorbing and dissipating every ounce of directed destruction. He took a step forward. The salvagers' bravado cracked. Skaros screamed for retreat, but panic had stolen their coordination. Some ran. Some fired faster, as if volume of fire might somehow penetrate where directed shots failed. One, a young Rhodian barely past adolescence, threw down his weapon and raised his hands in surrender. Broly saw the gesture. Recognition flickered in his expression. The rage building in his core wavered. For a moment, just a moment, he stood at a crossroads between his conditioning and something else. Something that might have been choice. Then the repeater cannon's operator, desperate and foolish, adjusted his aim and fired at the mineral processor's support struts. The massive structure groaned and toppled, 15 tons of industrial equipment plummeting toward the Rhodian who had surrendered. The youth looked up, understanding arriving too late, death written in falling shadow. Broly moved. He crossed the distance faster than thought, a green blur against blue stone. His hand caught the processor's edge an instant before impact, muscles flexing, ki surging. The equipment stopped as if it had struck bedrock. Broly held it above his head with one arm, his face contorted not with effort, but with the strain of controlling his response. The rage wanted him to throw the processor back at the salvagers, wanted him to erase the source of threat, wanted him to do what he had been shaped to do. Instead, he set it down carefully beside the trembling Rhodian. Then he vanished into the canyon network, leaving the salvagers alive and haunted by the question of what they had witnessed. The Force pulsed with confusion and interest. 3 days later, the Jedi Council convened in emergency session. The holo-projectors displayed reports from across the Outer Rim. 17 separate incidents, mining colonies reporting a figure of immense power appearing, causing destruction, then departing without apparent purpose. Trade convoys attacked, not for cargo but seemingly from agitation or provocation. A pirate base obliterated when they attempted to capture what they thought was a valuable alien specimen. And through every report, the same details. Massive size, green energy, strength that exceeded conventional measurement, and a presence in the Force that registered as a wound, a blank spot, a place where the cosmic energy could not flow properly. Yoda's ears drooped as he studied the data. Unprecedented, this is. A being of such power, yet not of darkness, not of light. Outside the Force's natural order, he stands. Mace Windu's jaw tightened. He had felt the disturbance most acutely, his connection to Varpad making him sensitive to anything that touched the borderland between control and chaos. He's not outside the Force, Master. The Force touches him. It just doesn't know how to interpret what it finds. He's like a star burning in a spectrum we can't see. Ki-Adi-Mundi leaned forward. Then he represents a threat. Something that cannot be understood, cannot be contained. We must consider the possibility of elimination. Several council members shifted uncomfortably. The Jedi did not assassinate, but the Jedi also protected the galaxy, and protection sometimes required absolute choices. Plo Koon's masked voice carried quiet reason. We don't even know if he can be eliminated. Every weapon turned against him has failed. If we attempt to kill him and fail, we create an enemy where there might have been something else. Then what do you propose? Mace asked. Yoda's eyes opened fully. Send someone, we must. Someone who can withstand his power long enough to understand. Someone who walks the edge themselves and knows the difference between darkness and pain. Every eye turned to Mace Windu. He accepted the mission without hesitation, though his heart carried the weight of what it might cost. Varpad was dangerous precisely because it channeled darkness without succumbing to it, a technique that only he and his fallen apprentice had mastered. If this being truly existed outside the Force's normal parameters, then perhaps Varpad's liminal nature could bridge the gap. Or perhaps it would destroy him. The Jedi Master departed Coruscant aboard a small courier ship, accompanied only by a pilot droid and his own meditation. The journey to Karos III took 4 days through hyperspace, and he spent every moment preparing his mind. He reviewed the reports, studied the combat footage salvaged from security cameras, watched the way the figure moved, fought, reacted. And in those movements, Mace saw something the others had missed. Hesitation. Every time the being's rage peaked, there was a moment where he seemed to fight against himself. Every time destruction seemed certain, there was a pause, a flicker of something that might have been restraint. The salvagers had lived because he chose to let them live. The miners survived because he walked away. Even the pirates, for all their obliteration, had fired first, threatened first, attempted to cage him first. This was not a predator hunting prey. This was a weapon trying not to be one. The courier ship dropped from hyperspace at the edge of Karos III's gravity well. Mace took a small shuttle down to the surface, leaving the ship in orbit. He wore simple robes, his lightsaber clipped to his belt but not in hand. He carried no weapons beyond that, no armor, no backup. If he could not reach this being through the Force and through understanding, then plasma and durasteel would make no difference. The shuttle landed on a plateau overlooking the valley network, where most sightings had occurred. Mace descended the ramp and stood in the toxic wind, his presence deliberately open, his signature in the Force like a bell ringing across the landscape. He was announcing himself, offering meeting rather than ambush. For an hour, nothing answered. Then the ground began to shake. Broly emerged from a canyon mouth 300 meters distant, his form massive against the craggy backdrop. He stopped when he saw Mace, head tilting in that characteristic gesture of confusion. Here was something new, something different from the miners and the pirates and the salvagers. This small figure registered as powerful in ways that contradicted his size. And around him, Broly sensed that strange energy he had felt since arriving in this dimension. The Force, though he had no name for it, pressed against his awareness like a question being asked. Mace studied him with equal intensity. The reports had not exaggerated. The being stood nearly 3 meters tall, his physique beyond what any known species could achieve naturally. The green aura flickered constantly around him, sometimes bright, sometimes dim, responding to invisible stimuli. But it was the eyes that held Mace's attention. They were not the eyes of a monster. They were the eyes of someone lost. Someone who did not understand where he was or why, and who had only one tool to make sense of existence: violence. "I am Mace Windu," the Jedi said, his voice carrying clearly across the distance. He made no aggressive moves. "I am here to understand you." Broly's lips moved, but no words emerged. His vocal cords had been trained for roars and battle cries, not language. His father had never encouraged speech. Speech was weakness. Speech was hesitation. Speech was for those who needed to negotiate rather than dominate. But somewhere in the broken landscape of his mind, Broly recognized the tone. Not threat, not fear. Something else, the same tone the Rhodian's surrender had carried, the tone that asked for something other than destruction. He took a step forward, and his power surged reflexively. The ground cracked, stone vaporized into dust. The toxic atmosphere ignited in green flame. Mace felt the pressure like a physical blow, but he did not retreat. He drew on the force, letting it flow through him, reinforcing his body against the environmental chaos. This was the test. Could he withstand the storm to reach the person within it? "You're not from this galaxy," Mace continued, his voice steady. "I can feel it. You don't understand the Force, and the Force doesn't understand you. But that doesn't make you a monster. That makes you lost." Broly's advance stopped. The word registered somehow. Lost. Yes, he was lost. He had been lost since the moment of his birth, when his power had marked him as aberrant, dangerous, something to be controlled rather than nurtured. He had been lost when his father placed the crown on his head and stole his will. Lost when his home planet exploded and scattered him across the cosmos. Lost when he landed here, in this fragile universe that seemed to fracture beneath his mere existence. The rage and the pain were the only constants, the only things that felt real. Mace saw the shift in body language, the tension that wound tighter, the aura brightening to blinding intensity. He knew, with the certainty granted by decades of combat and meditation, that he was about to face a force of nature. "If you need to fight," Mace said quietly, "then let us fight, but understand that I will not try to destroy you. I will try to reach you." Broly's roar shattered the plateau. He moved like green lightning, closing the distance in a fraction of a heartbeat. His fist, larger than Mace's head, descended with force sufficient to crack a moon. The Jedi Master's lightsaber ignited, its purple blade a streak of light against the green storm. He did not block the punch directly. Instead, he redirected it with a Varpad technique, letting the force flow around and past him, bleeding energy into the stone beneath his feet. The plateau exploded into a crater. Mace backflipped through the chaos, landing on a spire of rock that jutted from the new geography. Broly pursued, his speed absurd for his size, each movement covering dozens of meters. His next strike came as a combination, fists and elbows and knees blurring together in a pattern that would have overwhelmed any conventional defense. But Varpad was not conventional. Mace moved within the storm, his lightsaber becoming a wheel of purple light, his body flowing like water between strikes that could pulverize durasteel. He touched the rage emanating from Broly, not to control it but to understand it, to ride its current and find the spaces where it ebbed. This was the secret of Varpad. It did not oppose darkness. It danced with darkness, using the opponent's own momentum against them. Broly felt his strikes miss by impossibly small margins, felt his power flowing around this tiny figure rather than through him. Confusion spiked through his rage. How? Everyone broke. Everything broke. Power was absolute. His father had taught him that. The universe had confirmed it. Yet here stood someone who refused to break, not through greater strength but through something else. Something Broly's conditioning could not categorize. He roared again, and his power doubled, tripled. The green aura became a pillar of light reaching toward the toxic sky. His muscles swelled with ki, his already massive frame expanding further. This was the legendary Super Saiyan form asserting itself, Though Broly understood it only as the rage given form, the pain transformed into invincibility. Mace felt the pressure increase and adapted. He called on the Force more deeply, becoming a conduit rather than a dam. Let the power flow, let it rage. But in flowing and raging, let it reveal its source. And in that source, he finally sensed what he sought. Fear. Beneath the anger, beneath the pain, beneath the overwhelming power, Broly was afraid. Afraid of being controlled again. Afraid of hurting those who did not deserve it. Afraid that his power was all he would ever be. That the weapon was the only identity he would ever possess. "I see you," Mace said, his voice cutting through the maelstrom. "You're not just power. You're a person. Someone broke you into this shape, but it's not the only shape you can be." Broly's next strike came slower. Not weaker, but slower. The hesitation had returned, that moment of internal war where his conditioning fought against something deeper, something that had survived despite every effort to burn it away. Mace seized the moment. He deactivated his lightsaber and opened his hands. "Hit me, and prove your father right, that you're just a weapon, just a monster, or stop and prove that you're more." It was a gamble that could have ended with his death. The Force screamed warnings. Every combat instinct Mace possessed demanded he defend. But sometimes, the greatest act of faith was vulnerability. Broly's fist stopped a centimeter from Mace's face. The displaced air howled, stone vaporized. The heat was sufficient to melt Durasteel, but the strike did not land. The Saiyan warrior stood frozen, his massive frame trembling, his eyes locked on the small figure who had not flinched. Tears began to stream down his face, cutting channels through the dust and blood that coated his skin. Great, racking sobs erupted from his chest, and the green aura flickered and dimmed. He collapsed to his knees, no longer a titan but simply a broken soul given too much power and not enough reason. Mace stepped forward carefully, as one might approach a wounded rancor. He placed his hand on Broly's massive shoulder, and through the contact, let the Force flow between them. Not to control, not to manipulate, simply to offer connection, to show that touch did not have to mean dominance, that relationship did not have to mean pain. Broly felt the sensation of something other than combat. It was alien, terrifying, and desperately needed. "Come," Mace said gently. "Let me help you understand this galaxy. And perhaps, in understanding it, you can understand yourself." The plateau fell silent except for the toxic wind and the sound of broken breathing slowly steadying. Above them, the stars watched through Karos III's churning atmosphere, bearing witness to the moment when one soul reached through impossible differences to touch another. The journey back to Mace's shuttle was slow, measured, and profoundly strange. Broly walked beside the Jedi Master like a mountain learning to move with precision, his every step carefully controlled to avoid causing unnecessary destruction. He watched Mace constantly, studying the way the smaller being navigated the terrain with fluid grace, the way his presence in the Force remained calm and centered despite the proximity to overwhelming power. It was so different from every interaction Broly had known. His father had moved with calculation and fear, his enemies with aggression and desperation. But this one moved with purpose and peace. Mace maintained his open demeanor while simultaneously analyzing everything he observed. The being's power was truly staggering, far beyond what his initial reports had suggested. He estimated that a single full-force strike from Broly could potentially devastate a small capital ship. Yet that power came with a cost written in the warrior's body language. The constant tension of muscles perpetually ready for violence. The way his eyes tracked every movement as a potential threat. The shallow breathing of someone who had never truly felt safe. This was trauma given form. And trauma, Mace knew from decades of helping younglings who had witnessed atrocities, could not be commanded away. It had to be processed, understood, and slowly transformed through experience that contradicted its lessons. "The Force," Mace began, keeping his tone conversational, "is what allows me to do what I do. It's an energy field created by all living things. It binds the galaxy together, connects all consciousness. Some of us can sense it more clearly, use it to enhance our abilities. But it touches everyone, whether they know it or not. Broly listened without responding, his expression suggesting he understood tone if not all the words. But something in Mace's explanation resonated. That energy he had felt, the one that pressed against him constantly like a curious animal, had a name. And it was not hostile, not threatening, merely present, waiting to see what he would do. You generate something similar, Mace continued, but not the same. Your energy, it feels more like it comes from within you, rather than flowing through you from the cosmos. It's personal, biological. I've never encountered anything quite like it. They reached the shuttle as Karos 3's sun began to set, painting the toxic clouds in shades of amber and crimson. Mace paused at the ramp, considering logistics he had not fully planned. The shuttle had been designed for a single Jedi and perhaps one prisoner. Broly would barely fit through the door, and his mass alone might exceed the craft's weight tolerances. The Scion warrior solved the problem by sitting heavily on the ground beside the shuttle, making no move to board. His meaning was clear. He would wait. He would follow when Mace lifted off, trusting that the Jedi would not simply abandon him. It was, Mace realized, an act of faith from someone who had no reason to trust anything. "I'm not leaving you," Mace said firmly, "but we need to figure out how to get you safely transported. The temple on Coruscant has resources, people who can help you, healers, teachers. A place where you can learn to control your power rather than be controlled by it." Broly's eyes widened slightly at the word control, and his aura flared. The trauma response was immediate, a conditioned reaction to language that his father had weaponized. Control meant the crown. Control meant slavery. Control meant his will bent to another's purpose. Mace caught the shift instantly. "Not control like imprisonment," he corrected, adjusting his word choice. "Control like choosing. Like deciding when to use your strength and when to hold it back. The way you stopped yourself from hitting me, that was control. Your control, not someone else's." The flare dimmed. Broly processed the distinction with visible effort, his mind working through concepts that had been deliberately kept from him. Choice, agency, the idea that power could be directed by internal wisdom rather than external command. A sound emerged from his throat, raw and unpracticed. "Bro, why?" Mace's expression softened with understanding. The being was offering his name, the fundamental building block of identity. "Broly," Mace repeated, honoring the gift. "I'm Mace. We're going to help you, Broly. I promise." The Scion warrior's eyes closed briefly, and for a moment the perpetual tension in his frame eased. Then his head turned sharply toward the northern horizon, his instincts detecting something Mace's force senses confirmed a moment later. Ships, multiple signatures dropping from orbit, and their energy profiles matched Imperial design. The patrol cruiser Righteous Fist had been conducting standard outer rim sweeps when its sensors detected the anomalous energy readings from Karos 3. Captain Jarek, an ambitious officer hoping to distinguish himself before the Emperor, had ordered immediate investigation. If the reports of an unstable alien creature were accurate, capturing or eliminating it would surely earn recognition from his superiors, perhaps even the attention of Lord Vader himself. 6 atmospheric assault craft descended through the toxic clouds, their searchlights carving columns through the perpetual gloom. Stormtroopers locked and loaded their weapons, while AT-ST walkers powered up their weapon systems in the carrier's holds. This was a capture mission, but lethal force was pre-authorized. The Empire did not negotiate with threats. Broly rose to his full height as the craft approached, his body language shifting into combat stance automatically. The sight of military force triggered deep-seated associations. Uniforms, authority, violence masked as order. His father had used similar language, similar justifications for the control crown, for the missions that had painted Broly's hands with blood he had not chosen to spill. Mace positioned himself between Broly and the incoming craft, his hand raised in a calming gesture to both parties. "Stay with me," he said firmly. "They don't understand what you are. If you attack, you confirm their fears. If you defend yourself with restraint, you give me space to negotiate." The lead assault craft's external speakers crackled to life. "Attention, unidentified beings. You are in violation of Imperial space protocols. Stand down and submit to immediate detention or lethal force is authorized." "I am Jedi Master Mace Windu," Mace called back, amplifying his voice with the Force. "The being with me is under Jedi protection and poses no threat if left unprovoked." Captain Jarrett's response came harsh with disdain. "The Jedi Order has no authority in Imperial territory. Under Directive 7-7 Alpha, all anomalous entities are to be secured for study or eliminated. You have 30 seconds to step aside, Master Jedi." Broly's aura began to expand, green light coruscating across his skin. He understood enough. These beings wanted to cage him, study him, turn him into a specimen or a weapon. The same pattern, endless and inescapable, even across dimensions and galaxies. "Broly, look at me," Mace commanded, his tone sharp enough to cut through the rage's first stirrings. The Saiyan's eyes locked onto his. "You're not trapped. You're not helpless. And I will not let them take you. But if you lose control now, you prove them right. Show them what you showed me. Show them you can choose." The internal war played across Broly's features like weather across a landscape, the rage pulling one direction, the desperate, fragile hope that Mace represented pulling another. 30 seconds felt like 30 eternities. Then Broly's hands dropped to his sides, and he took one deliberate step backward, not retreating, but yielding space, granting Mace room to handle what came next. The assault craft landed in formation, ramps dropping with hydraulic hisses. Stormtroopers poured out, 40 strong, their blaster rifles trained on both Jedi and Saiyan. The AT-ST walkers stomped forward, their chin guns tracking targets with mechanical precision. Captain Jarrett descended from the command craft, flanked by his personal guard, his expression mixing professional duty with thinly veiled excitement at confronting a Jedi. "Stand aside, Master Windu," Jarrett repeated. "We have orders regarding the creature. The Empire has jurisdiction here." "The Empire has jurisdiction where it can enforce it," Mace replied calmly. "And I assure you, Captain, attempting to enforce anything against Broly will not end well for anyone present." One of the stormtroopers shifted nervously, his weapon's aim wavering as he registered the sheer size and presence of the figure looming behind the Jedi. Broly stood like a monument to violence, restrained, his aura dim but present, his eyes tracking every trooper with predatory awareness. The man's instincts, honed through countless firefights, screamed warnings his training demanded he ignore. Jarrett sneered. "The Empire does not fear Jedi parlor tricks or their pet projects. Troopers, prepare stun nets and shock grenades. We'll take both of them if necessary." The stormtroopers advanced, their equipment specialized for capturing dangerous fauna and rogue force users. Broly's muscles tensed, combat readiness surging through his system despite his promise to Mace. The Jedi Master felt the shift, sensed the warrior balancing on the razor's edge between control and explosion. "Broly," Mace said quietly, urgently, "remember what I told you. This is your choice, your power, not theirs, not mine, yours." The words reached something in Broly that the crown had tried to burn away but never quite destroyed. Choice, his choice. He could fight, could obliterate every being here in seconds, could make the plateau run red with consequences, or he could prove his father wrong. Could prove that the weapon contained a person, that the monster held a soul. His aura dimmed further, then vanished entirely, pulled inward through sheer effort of will, compressed into the core of his being where it burned like a star held in check by impossible restraint. The stormtroopers faltered. Several had been preparing for violent resistance, their tactics built around suppressing a raging beast. Passive compliance from something that registered as apocalyptically dangerous created cognitive dissonance. Jarrett, sensing his troopers' hesitation, barked a command to fire stun nets regardless. Mace's lightsaber ignited. The purple blade caught the first net before it deployed, slicing through the weighted edges and dropping it harmlessly. The second net came from an unexpected angle, but Mace was already spinning, his Varpad technique transforming defense into a continuous flow of deflection. Stun grenades arced through the air, and the Jedi Master extended his hand, calling on the Force to arrest their momentum mid-flight and redirect them harmlessly into empty ground. "Lethal force authorized," Jarek screamed, his composure cracking. The AT-ST walkers opened fire, their chin guns spitting coherent plasma. Mace moved between the beams, his connection to the Force allowing him to anticipate the walkers' targeting solutions. But some shots were aimed at Broly, seeking to provoke the creature into providing justification for escalation. The plasma bolts struck the Scion's chest, his arms, his face. Each impact created a flash of light and a sound like thunder. Broly stood unmoved, his body absorbing the damage with only the faintest burns appearing on his skin, wounds that began healing within seconds. His teeth gritted. His eyes squeezed shut. Every instinct screamed to retaliate, to erase the threat, to make the pain stop the only way he knew how. But Mace had called the restraint his choice, his power, his control. So Broly stood and endured. The troopers' fire intensified, fear overriding training. They poured everything into the unmoving target, watching in horror as their weapons proved utterly insufficient. One walker advanced for a physical strike, its massive foot rising to stomp. Broly caught it with one hand, stopping the multi-ton machine like it was made of parchment. He held it there, trembling with the effort of not crushing, not destroying, not responding with the violence that came so naturally. Then he set it down gently and stepped back again. The gesture broke something in the Imperial formation. The sheer wrongness of a being that could withstand such punishment and respond with restraint shattered their tactical assumptions. Several troopers lowered their weapons. Others looked to their captain, waiting for orders that made sense. Jarek saw his operation disintegrating. Worse, he saw his chance at recognition slipping away. In desperation, he activated a device on his belt, sending a priority signal. Within minutes, reinforcements would arrive. Within an hour, orbital bombardment could be authorized. He would capture this creature, or he would ensure no one did. "You've made your choice, Jedi," Jarek spat. "When the rest of the fleet arrives, you'll both be vapor." Mace felt the threat's sincerity and recognized the impossible position. Fighting his way out meant cutting down Imperial troops, an action that would brand him a traitor and validate every accusation the Emperor made against the Jedi Order. Surrendering meant watching Broly be dissected or enslaved. And staying meant both. Unless they left. Immediately. "Broly, we need to move," Mace said, already calculating trajectories and distances. "Can you reach orbit?" The Scion warrior's eyes opened, comprehension dawning. He nodded once, his meaning clear. He could fly, could carry Mace if needed, could escape this trap, though every conditioned response in his being rebelled against fleeing from a fight. Mace deactivated his lightsaber and leaped, using the Force to propel himself toward Broly. The Scion caught him effortlessly, cradling the Jedi Master against his chest with surprising gentleness. Then Broly's aura exploded back into existence, green fire engulfing them both, and he launched skyward like a biological missile. The acceleration should have liquefied Mace's organs. Instead, he felt Broly's ki somehow forming a protective cocoon, a bubble of stable space within the maelstrom of energy and velocity. They punched through Karos 3's atmosphere in seconds, the toxic clouds parting around Broly's passage like water around a stone. Below, the Imperial forces scrambled, but their weapons lacked the range or tracking capability to engage a target moving that fast. In orbit, Mace's courier ship detected their approach and maneuvered to intercept on pre-programmed commands. Broly's trajectory adjusted mid-flight, his instinctive understanding of three-dimensional combat translating to navigation. They matched velocity with the ship, and Mace manually opened the airlock from his communicator. Both beings tumbled into the corridor, the airlock sealing behind them as the ship's droid pilot engaged hyperdrive. Stars stretched into lines, and Karos III vanished into the cosmic distance. Broly released Mace carefully, then collapsed against the bulkhead. His breathing labored not from physical exhaustion, but from the sustained effort of restraint. He had done it. Had faced military force, been shot, been attacked, and had not retaliated with obliteration. The victory felt strange, hollow somehow. His entire life, strength had meant dominance. Victory meant submission of the enemy, but this felt like victory of a different kind. One measured not in destruction but in choice sustained, despite every reason to abandon it. Mace steadied himself and looked at the warrior with profound respect. "What you just did," he said quietly, "most Jedi Masters couldn't have managed. You held back against every instinct. You chose peace when violence would have been easier. That's not weakness, Broly. That's the hardest strength there is." The Saiyan's eyes met his, and in them Mace saw the tentative emergence of something precious and fragile. Pride. Not the arrogant pride of domination, but the quiet pride of someone discovering they might be more than what they were told they were. The journey to Coruscant would take days through hyperspace. Days they would use to begin the real work of helping Broly understand this galaxy, the Force, and most importantly, himself. But for now, as the ship raced through the cosmic currents and left Imperial pursuit far behind, both beings allowed themselves a moment of stillness, a breath between battles, a space where trust could begin to grow. The galaxy would learn of them soon enough. But for this moment, they existed in that rare and sacred space where transformation becomes possible. The courier ship's meditation chamber was designed for a single Jedi, barely 3 meters square with padded walls and an environmental control system that could simulate various atmospheric conditions. Broly filled it entirely, his massive frame folded into a seated position that looked profoundly uncomfortable, his head nearly touching the ceiling. But he had insisted, through gesture and expression, on remaining close to Mace. The Jedi Master recognized it for what it was. A being who had been isolated and weaponized, trying to maintain the first genuine connection he had ever experienced. Mace sat across from him in a more traditional meditation posture, his breathing deep and controlled. Between them, he had placed a small holocron, its geometric surfaces glowing softly with blue light. The device projected images as Mace spoke, visual aids to help bridge the linguistic and conceptual gaps. "The Force is not a tool," Mace explained, watching the holocron display ancient Jedi and Sith engaged in their eternal dance. "It's a relationship. The light side flows through compassion, harmony, selflessness. The dark side grows from fear, anger, hatred. Both exist in every living being. The difference is which one we feed, which one we allow to shape our choices." Broly watched the images with intense concentration, his eyes tracking the flowing movements of lightsaber combat and the visual metaphors of light and shadow. His hand reached out tentatively toward the projection of a Jedi Knight channeling the Force to lift stones, his expression questioning. "You want to know if you can learn this," Mace interpreted. It was not really a question. "Honestly, I don't know. Your energy is different. But different doesn't mean incompatible. The Force touches you. I've felt it trying to establish a connection, like two frequencies trying to harmonize. If you're willing to train, to open yourself to something beyond raw power, then maybe we can find a bridge." The Saiyan warrior's aura flickered briefly, an unconscious manifestation of his emotional state. Mace had begun recognizing the patterns. Bright green meant anger or fear rising. Dim green meant focus or calm. Complete suppression meant maximum restraint being exercised. It was, in its way, a language all its own. "Tell me about your father," Mace said gently, shifting the conversation to what he sensed was the core wound. "I felt your reaction earlier when I used the word control. Someone used it to hurt you." Broly's hands clenched into fists, and the temperature in the chamber rose noticeably. His jaw worked as he fought to form words his vocal cords barely remembered how to shape. Fa, thur. He managed, the syllables rough and painful. Crown, control, Kakarot. The words were few, but they carried immense weight. Mace let silence invite more, understanding that trauma needed space to emerge, could not be commanded or rushed. Broly's eyes distant, looking at memories that probably predated this galaxy. He raised one massive hand to his forehead, fingers tracing where something had once been. His expression contorted with pain and rage, but also something deeper. Betrayal. The fundamental wound of a child whose parent chose domination over love. He made you into a weapon, Mace said softly. He saw your power and was afraid, so he tried to control it. Control you. And when that control slipped, he blamed you for the destruction instead of himself for forcing you into that shape. Tears began streaming down Broly's face, his body shaking with sobs that seemed too large for the chamber to contain. The green aura flared wildly, but Mace did not retreat or defend. Instead, he reached out and placed his hand on Broly's knee, a point of contact that said, "I see your pain. I do not fear it. You are safe to feel it here." The gesture broke something fundamental in Broly's defensive architecture. He had been shaped to believe that emotion meant weakness, that vulnerability invited exploitation, that the only safety lay in being so dangerous no one would dare approach. But here sat someone who approached anyway, who touched him with kindness rather than fear, who offered understanding instead of control. For the first time since the crown had been placed on his head, Broly wept without restraint, and in weeping began to release the pressure that had built across years and dimensions, battles and betrayals, until it had compressed into rage so dense it could shatter worlds. Mace maintained his presence through the storm, his own eyes damp with shared grief. He had seen so much trauma in his years. Younglings orphaned by war, Padawans broken by their first encounter with true darkness, knights who lost themselves trying to protect what they loved. But this was something different. This was innocence destroyed before it could even form, a child given godlike power and no reason to see it as anything but curse. The weeping eventually subsided into quiet shuddering. Broly's aura stabilized at a dim, almost peaceful level. He looked at Mace with an expression that held both exhaustion and gratitude, his eyes asking a question he lacked words to form. "You asked without speaking," Mace said, demonstrating the answer he suspected Broly sought. "Whether I'm afraid of you. I was, initially. It would be foolish not to fear power of your magnitude, but I'm not afraid now. Because I've seen you make the hardest choice existence offers. You've chosen to be more than your pain, and that choice makes you someone worth believing in." The Saiyan warrior's lips moved, forming words with monumental effort. "Am I monster?" It was the question his father had answered with the crown, the question every battle had answered with blood, the question that defined every moment of his existence. Monster or person, weapon or being, power incarnate or soul burdened with power. Mace met his eyes directly, his voice carrying the full authority of his conviction. "No. You're someone who has been through more than any being should endure. You're someone fighting the hardest battle there is, the battle against what others tried to make you. And you're winning, Broly. Every time you choose restraint over rage, you win." The words settled into Broly like rain into parched earth. He did not fully believe them yet, but for the first time he could imagine believing them, could imagine a future where the question had a different answer, where the power served something beyond destruction, where he could exist without apology. A chime from the ship's control system interrupted the moment. The droid pilot's synthesized voice announced they were approaching a navigational waypoint and would drop from hyperspace briefly to recalculate their course. Standard procedure for long-distance travel through unmapped regions. Mace rose smoothly. "Rest, if you can. I'll check our position." But Broly stood as well, his intention clear. Where Mace went, he would follow. The attachment forming between them was obvious, a desperate anchor in a universe that made no sense. Mace recognized it as both beautiful and dangerous. Attachment led to fear of loss. Fear of loss led to anger. Anger to hatred, suffering. The classic warning. Yet he also understood that denying Broly connection now, after he had finally opened himself to it, would do more harm than the attachment's risks warranted. Sometimes the Jedi Code had to bend, had to acknowledge that healing required relationship even when relationship carried danger. "Then come," Mace said. "Let me show you how we navigate the stars." They moved to the cockpit together, Broly having to crouch significantly to fit through corridors designed for average-sized beings. The viewport showed the kaleidoscopic tunnel of hyperspace, those impossible colors that existed between dimensions. The Saiyan warrior stared in fascination, his hand reaching toward the view before catching himself, some memory warning him about breaking things. "You can touch it," Mace assured him. "The viewport is reinforced transparasteel, very strong." Carefully, with the precision of someone terrified of their own strength, Broly placed one finger against the surface. The cool material transmitted subtle vibrations from the ship's passage through hyperspace. His expression shifted through wonder to something like peace. This was beautiful, non-threatening, a kind of power entirely unlike his own. The power of technology and understanding rather than destruction. The ship shuddered as it dropped from hyperspace into real space. Normal stars blazed against the void, and the droid pilot began calculating the next jump. But Mace's attention fixed on the long-range sensors, which had detected something concerning. 3 ships, unknown configuration, approaching rapidly on an intercept course. "This sector should be empty," Mace muttered, his hand moving to the communications panel. He opened a general hailing frequency. "Unknown vessels. This is a Republic courier on diplomatic mission. Please state your intention." The response came in Huttese, the lingua franca of the galactic underworld. "Republic ship, you're carrying something that doesn't belong to you. Power signature that strong, it's got to be worth millions to the right buyer. Shut down your engines and prepare to be boarded. Make it easy. Maybe we let you live." Pirates. Or more accurately, opportunistic slavers who had detected Broly's energy signature from systems away and decided to investigate. They had no idea what they were pursuing, but the sensor readings suggested either a valuable artifact or a force-sensitive being. Either way, a profitable capture. Broly's aura began to expand, his combat reflexes activating. These beings wanted to cage him, sell him, turn him into property. The pattern repeated across realities, eternal and intolerable. Mace felt the surge and spoke quickly. "They can't board us if we jump to hyperspace first. This doesn't have to be a fight." But the pirate vessels had already anticipated escape. They fired, not to destroy but to disable. Ion cannons rippled across space. Electromagnetic pulses designed to shut down electronic systems without harming valuable cargo. The courier ship's shields absorbed the first volley, but the second and third broke through. Warning lights erupted across the control panel. Hyperdrive offline. The droid reported with mechanical calm. Engines at 40%, shields failing. The pirate vessels moved to surround them, launching boarding pods with magnetic clamps. This was routine for them, a well-practiced operation. Disable, board, secure cargo, eliminate witnesses if necessary. They had done it dozens of times across the Outer Rim's lawless sectors. They had never encountered anything like Broly. The Saiyan warrior moved to the airlock, his intention obvious. Mace started to call him back, then reconsidered. Perhaps this was necessary. Perhaps some lessons could only be learned through direct experience. And perhaps, just perhaps, Broly needed to discover that he could use his power without losing himself to it. "If you go out there," Mace said carefully, "remember what you've learned. You can fight without killing. You can defend without destroying. Show them what power looks like when it's guided by choice." Broly looked back at him, seeking confirmation that he had permission, that this would not disappoint the first being to offer him something other than fear or exploitation. Mace nodded once, a gesture of trust that carried profound weight. The airlock opened. Broly stepped into the void. Space held no terror for him. His ki created a protective aura that maintained pressure and temperature, a biological force field that defied conventional physics. He could survive vacuum indefinitely, another facet of Saiyan physiology that his father had exploited countless times by sending him to planets where normal beings required extensive life support. The boarding pods locked onto the courier ship's hull with magnetic thuds. Pirates emerged in environment suits, carrying weapons designed to incapacitate rather than kill valuable merchandise. They saw the massive figure floating in space and paused, their tactical assumptions fracturing. The lead pirate, a Rhodian named Zedo who had survived 2 decades in this brutal trade, activated his suit's external speakers. "That's far enough, big guy. You come nice and quiet. Maybe we find you a good home instead of a dissection lab. Fight back, and we space you right here." Broly's response was to fly directly at the nearest boarding pod. Not with rage-fueled speed, but with measured velocity. He reached it, gripped its hull, and with carefully controlled strength, crushed the magnetic clamps. Then he pushed it gently away from the courier ship, back toward the pirate vessel it had launched from. The pirates inside screamed as their pod went tumbling through space, its systems offline but its life support intact. They would live, would be recovered by their ship, but they would not complete their mission. Zedo processed this development with growing horror. The creature was unimaginably strong, immune to vacuum, and showing restraint, which somehow made it more terrifying than simple rage would have. "All units, lethal force authorized, take it down." The pirates opened fire with everything they carried: blaster rifles, ion grenades, a shoulder-mounted micro-torpedo launcher. The fusillade lit space like a constellation of violence. Broly flew through it like a swimmer through rain, his aura absorbing damage that should have vaporized him. He reached the second boarding pod and repeated the process. Crush clamps, push away, move to the next. One pirate, desperate and foolish, attempted to plant a thermal detonator on Broly's back. The Saiyan warrior sensed the motion, turned, and caught the pirate's wrist before the device could be armed. He held the being there in space, his eyes boring into the Rhodian's face through the helmet visor, communicating without words a simple message: "I could kill you. I'm choosing not to. Learn from this." Then he released the pirate and moved on. Within minutes, all boarding pods had been disabled and pushed clear. The pirate ships themselves remained, but their crews had lost appetite for engagement. Something that could operate in hard vacuum, withstand concentrated fire, and demonstrate mercy while doing so existed outside their operational parameters. Zedo, his survival instincts finally overriding his greed, ordered full retreat. The pirate vessels engaged their drives and fled into the black, leaving the courier ship damaged but secure. Broly returned to the airlock, his aura bright but controlled, his expression holding something new, not satisfaction in violence endured, but satisfaction in violence avoided. He had been powerful, had dominated the situation, but had done so without painting space with bodies, without adding to the endless tally of death his existence had accumulated. Mace met him at the airlock, pride evident in his expression. "You see, power guided by wisdom is always stronger than power guided by rage. They'll remember this, they'll tell stories, and maybe, just maybe, those stories will save lives." Broly's responding expression was tentative but genuine, something that might have been a smile, the first real smile of his life. The droid pilot reported that repairs would take several hours, but were manageable. They would reach Coruscant with delay but intact. Mace guided Broly back to the meditation chamber, noting how the Saiyan's posture had shifted. Less hunched, less defensive, the perpetual tension easing by increments. "What you did out there," Mace said, as they settled back into their positions, "that's what the Jedi call using the Force for knowledge and defense, never for attack. You have your own force, your own way of touching the universe. But the principle is the same. We use power to protect, not to dominate. Broly listened with the intensity of someone starving for guidance. His father had taught him to destroy, to fear his own strength, to see power only as a curse requiring absolute control from outside. But Mace taught something different. That power could be a gift. That strength could build instead of break. That the destructive potential was simply one aspect of a fuller possibility. The Jedi Temple will be difficult for you, Mace continued, being honest about the challenges ahead. It's full of people, all of them force-sensitive, all of them trained to sense emotion. They'll feel your power, and many will be afraid. Some will want to contain you, others will want to study you. Very few will initially see you as I do, as someone worthy of compassion and understanding. The Scion's aura dimmed with familiar resignation. Of course, the pattern would repeat. Fear, containment, conflict. Why would this be different? But, Mace said firmly, I will be with you, and I am a master of the council. My word carries weight. More importantly, I will make sure they understand what I understand. That you're not a threat to be neutralized. You're a person to be helped. Broly's eyes met his, and in them Mace saw a question he had not voiced. Why? Why would this stranger invest such effort, take such risks, advocate so fiercely for a being whose very existence strained the Force's comprehension? Mace considered his answer carefully, knowing it would matter. Because the Jedi Code teaches us that all life is precious. All consciousness deserves compassion. But more than that, because I look at you and see what I might have become if my path had been different. I walk the edge between light and dark every time I use Varpad. I know what it is to hold power that frightens others, to be seen as dangerous even by those who should understand. So when I see someone struggling with even greater power, greater pain, I see someone who deserves the help I received. The words created visible impact. Broly's entire frame relaxed in ways Mace had not previously witnessed. The idea that he was not alone, that someone else understood the isolation of dangerous power, penetrated defenses that nothing else had breached. They sat in companionable silence for a long while, the ship humming around them, repairs continuing automatically. Outside the viewport, the stars wheeled in their eternal dance, indifferent to the small drama of connection and healing occurring within this tiny vessel. Eventually, Broly's breathing deepened into something approaching sleep. His body, perpetually stressed by the effort of containing his power, desperately needed rest. Mace maintained his meditation, keeping watch, ensuring that if the Scion's dreams turned to nightmares, there would be a steady presence to anchor him. And as he watched, Mace reflected on the profound responsibility he had undertaken. Bringing Broly to Coruscant was not without risk. The Council might overrule his judgment. The Senate might demand the being be contained or expelled from Republic space. Other forces, sensing such power, might move to claim or destroy it. But the alternative was leaving Broly alone in a galaxy he did not understand, with power he could not properly control, carrying trauma that would inevitably erupt into catastrophe. That path led only to tragedy, multiple tragedies. This path, difficult as it would be, offered hope, a chance that something unprecedented might become something transformative. That power which had only known destruction might learn creation, that a soul shaped into a weapon might be reshaped into a person. The Force itself seemed to whisper agreement, its currents flowing with unusual clarity through the meditation chamber. Perhaps even the cosmic energy recognized the significance of this moment. Perhaps it too understood that the greatest tests came not from defeating enemies, but from extending compassion across impossible divides. The repairs completed, the ship's systems came back online. The droid pilot calculated the final jump to Coruscant and engaged the hyperdrive. In the meditation chamber, Jedi Master and Scion Warrior traveled toward an uncertain future, bound together by trust too new to be tested and hope too fragile to be certain. But hope nonetheless. And in a galaxy often defined by darkness, even fragile hope burned like a sun. The spires of Coruscant rose into view like crystalline fingers reaching for the stars, their surfaces reflecting the perpetual glow of a planet that had forgotten natural darkness. 1 trillion beings lived here, layer upon layer of civilization stacked so high that the lowest levels existed in permanent twilight, while the tallest towers bathed in sunlight filtered through atmospheric processes. The Jedi Temple stood among the highest, its ancient architecture a statement of permanence amid the ever-changing cityscape, its ziggurat form deliberately evoking the sacred mountains of 1,000 cultures. Broly stared through the viewport with expression mixing wonder and apprehension. He had destroyed planets, had reduced civilizations to ash because his father commanded it, because his rage demanded outlet, because his power had nowhere else to go. But he had never truly seen a place where beings simply lived, where the purpose was existence rather than conquest, where architecture reached upward not in defiance but in aspiration. Overwhelming, isn't it? Mace said, noting Broly's reaction. I felt the same way when I first arrived as a child. Couldn't understand how so many beings could coexist in one space without constant warfare. But that's what civilization is, the agreement that coexistence serves us better than conflict. The courier ship descended through designated Jedi approach lanes, automated systems guiding them toward the temple's private landing platform. As they drew closer, Broly's aura began fluctuating with increasing agitation. Mace sensed the cause. The temple thrummed with force energy, thousands of Jedi and younglings all contributing to a harmonious whole that Broly's different nature registered as overwhelming pressure. Breathe, Mace instructed, demonstrating the technique. Center yourself. The force touching you is not hostile. It's curious. Let it be curious. You don't have to respond or fight it. Broly tried to follow the guidance, his massive chest rising and falling in deliberate rhythm. The effort was visible, every muscle taut with the strain of not lashing out at the unfamiliar sensation. But he maintained control, anchoring himself to Mace's presence, trusting that if the Jedi Master seemed calm, there was reason for calm. The ship settled onto the platform with barely a tremor. Mace stood and adjusted his robes, then turned to Broly with an expression combining reassurance and warning. When we step out, there will be council members waiting. They'll want immediate debrief. Some will seem hostile or afraid. Do not react to their fear. Simply stand with me and let me speak. Can you do that? The Saiyan warrior nodded, though his hands clenched and unclenched nervously. He had fought armies, had battled beings of immense power, but this, walking peacefully into a place full of strangers while everyone stared and judged, felt more difficult than any combat. The ramp descended. Coruscant's processed air flooded in, carrying scents of ozone and distant cooking, and the indefinable smell of concentrated life. Mace descended first, his posture relaxed but his senses hyper-alert. Broly followed, and had to duck significantly to clear the ship's doorframe. When he straightened to his full height on the platform, he heard several sharp intakes of breath from the assembled Jedi. Master Yoda stood at the center of the welcoming party, his small frame somehow commanding greater presence than his size suggested. Flanking him were council members, Ki-Adi Mundi, his elongated cranium furrowed with concern, Plo Koon, his masked face unreadable but his body language cautious, Shakti, her montrals sensitizing her to emotional currents that must have been nearly painful with Broly's proximity, and a dozen temple guards, their yellow-bladed lightsaber pikes held ready but not ignited. The silence stretched as everyone assessed everyone else. Broly's eyes tracked each figure, calculating threat levels with the automatic assessment of a being shaped by endless warfare. But he made no aggressive moves, merely stood beside Mace with hands at his sides, his aura suppressed to the barest shimmer. Yoda's ears perked slightly, a gesture Mace recognized as surprise. Much restraint, I sense, the ancient master said, his voice carrying clearly despite its roughness. Different from reports, this is. Because he's learned, Mace replied evenly. Master Yoda, honored council members, I present Broly. He is not from our galaxy. His power operates through different principles than the Force, and he has been traumatized, weaponized, and controlled his entire life. He comes here seeking understanding, not conflict. Ki Adi Mundi stepped forward, his skepticism evident. His power signature is catastrophic. We felt it across half the core worlds when you entered the system. How can we possibly accommodate something that inherently destabilizes the Force? He's not an object to be accommodated, Mace said, his tone sharpening with protective authority. He's a being deserving respect and compassion. And before anyone suggests containment or exile, understand that he has already demonstrated more self-control than most of us could manage under similar circumstances. Broly's aura flickered brighter at the word containment, his trauma response immediate. But Mace's hand moved slightly, a gesture that said, "Stay calm, I'm handling this, trust me." The Cyan warrior forced his energy back down, though the effort was visible. Shakti noticed the interaction and spoke softly. "Master Windu, your faith in this being is clear, but faith alone cannot override concerns for temple safety. We have younglings here, students. If he loses control even once, he has already been shot at, attacked by Imperial forces, and boarded by pirates," Mace countered. In each case, he held back. He chose restraint when obliteration would have been easier. That's not instability, that's strength of will. Yoda thumped his staff against the platform, drawing all attention. A test, perhaps. See what he does when provoked. Without Master Windu to guide him, we shall. Mace's expression hardened. "Master, I must object." Testing him through provocation is precisely what caused his trauma in the first place. His father used that exact methodology to justify control measures. "Yet know his limits we must," Yoda replied, not unkindly but firm. "For his sake as much as ours. A place here he cannot have, unless certain of his control we are." The other council members nodded agreement, and Mace realized this decision had been made before they landed. The council would not simply accept his judgment. They needed their own evidence, their own measure of Broly's nature. "Then let me be clear," Mace said, his voice carrying the weight of his Varpad training, the edge that made even Master Yoda regard him carefully. "If this test causes him to lose control and people are hurt, the responsibility lies with whoever designed it, not with Broly. He's doing everything possible to maintain restraint. Pushing him is a choice we make, and we bear the consequences." Plo Koon's modulated voice carried diplomatic care. "No one will be harmed, Master Windu. We propose a simple demonstration. Let him spar with one of our best duelists in the training hall. We observe his technique, his control, his response to structured combat. If he can fight without destroying, we have our answer." It was, Mace recognized, as reasonable a compromise as the council would offer. And perhaps it served a purpose beyond their testing. Perhaps Broly needed to prove to himself, in front of witnesses, that he could engage in combat without becoming the monster his father named him. "Broly," Mace said, turning to the Cyan warrior. "They want to see you fight. Controlled sparring, no killing, just demonstration of skill. Are you willing?" The massive being looked at the assembled Jedi, then back at Mace. His expression asked the question his limited words could not. Would this prove what Mace had said? Would this show them he was more than power? Worth more than fear? "Yes," Mace answered the unspoken query. "This is your chance to show them, and I believe you can do it." Broly nodded slowly. Then he surprised everyone by attempting speech. The words came rough and halting, but clear enough. "Will not Brarik. Trust." The simple statement carried profound weight. Several council members exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from wariness towards something more complex. This being, this creature of apocalyptic power, cared about trust, about promises, about the relationship he had formed with Mace Windu. That single factor might change everything. The training hall occupied a massive chamber in the temple's central section, its ceiling reaching 30 meters high and its floor space sufficient to accommodate full battalion combat drills. The walls were lined with observation platforms where students could watch masters demonstrate technique. Today, those platforms filled with Jedi of all ranks, word having spread through the temple that something unprecedented was occurring. Broly stood at one end of the hall, his presence making the vast space feel smaller. He had removed what remained of his tattered armor at Mace's suggestion, standing now in simple cloth pants that the temple quartermasters had hastily assembled from multiple sets of the largest robes available. His upper body remained bare, revealing the network of old scars and new ones still healing from the Imperial attack, each mark a testament to battles survived. At the opposite end stood Sindralig, the temple's battlemaster and widely considered one of the finest duelists in the Order. He held his lightsaber unignited, his stance relaxed but ready, his expression professionally neutral. He had trained Jedi to face Sith, to counter every known combat form, to adapt to the unexpected. But this would test even his considerable skill. Yoda's voice echoed from the primary observation platform. "Begin when ready, you are. Remember, Battlemaster Drolig, assess not destroy. Learn his nature through combat we must." Drolig bowed acknowledgement, then ignited his blue blade in a salute. "No hard feelings, friend," he called to Broly, "just a friendly spar between warriors." Broly understood the posture, if not all the words. This was sanctioned, permitted. Not the desperate violence of those who feared him, but structured combat meant to prove skill rather than dominance. His father had never allowed such things. Every fight had been real, lethal, the stakes absolute. But this was different. Mace had promised, and Broly was learning to trust promises. Drolig initiated with a classic Makashi approach, his blade extending in a precise thrust that tested Broly's reflexes without committing fully. The Saiyan warrior shifted sideways, his movement economical despite his size. His eyes tracked the blade with predatory focus, calculating speed, reach, the pattern of commitment. The Battlemaster smiled slightly. Fast. Good. He increased tempo, flowing through Ataru's acrobatic style, his body becoming a blur of motion as he attacked from multiple angles. Lightsaber and force-enhanced speed combined into a demonstration of Jedi martial perfection. Broly dodged each strike, his body bending and weaving through the storm of plasma. He made no counterattacks, simply evaded, demonstrating that he could track and react to threats far faster than his size suggested. Several watching Jedi gasped as the lightsaber passed within centimeters of Broly's skin without contact, the Saiyan's spatial awareness allowing him to minimize movement while maximizing avoidance. Drolig shifted tactics, recognizing that speed alone would not penetrate this defense. He adopted Soresu, the defensive form that waited for opponent mistakes. His blade wove a constant barrier as he circled, his movements designed to invite attack while remaining protected. Broly watched the pattern, understanding dawning. The Battlemaster wanted him to strike, to show offensive capability. But how to strike without hurting? His power, even restrained, could shatter bones with a tap, could pierce flesh like paper. Every instinct screamed that attacking meant destroying. Yet, Mace had said to trust, to show them. Broly stepped forward and threw a punch, his fist moving at perhaps 1/10 his true speed. Drolig's lightsaber intercepted, the blade positioned to deflect rather than cut. The impact created a sound like thunder, force and ki colliding in spectacular light show. Drolig skidded backward several meters, his boots leaving scorch marks on the training hall floor, but he maintained his stance and his grip. "Excellent control," the Battlemaster called, genuine approval in his voice. "Again, let's see combination work." They engaged in earnest now, Broly throwing strikes that Drolig deflected or dodged, the Battlemaster countering with cuts and thrusts that Broly avoided or allowed to graze non-lethally. It became a dance, a conversation in movement where each participant pushed the other while respecting boundaries. Broly learned to modulate his strength dynamically, adjusting each blow's force based on how Drolig responded. Drolig learned to read Broly's tells, the subtle shifts in aura brightness that presaged attacks. On the observation platforms, the watching Jedi's opinions visibly shifted. What they witnessed was not a berserker barely restrained, but a fighter of immense skill choosing to operate at a level appropriate to the context. That required awareness, judgment, and compassion. All qualities they associated with sentient beings, not mindless weapons. Yoda's ears lifted fully upright, his expression thoughtful. More here than power there is. Wisdom in restraint, understanding of consequences, But Ki-Adi-Mundi remained skeptical. He fights well now, under controlled conditions. But what about when emotions spike, when he's truly threatened or angered? As if summoned by the concern, an alarm began wailing through the temple. Red lights flashed. The tactical board on the wall lit with urgent data. A voice crackled over the intercom. All available Jedi to the Senate District. Terrorist attack in progress. Mass casualties. Emergency response needed immediately. The training hall erupted into organized chaos as Jedi raced to respond. Dralig deactivated his lightsaber and bowed quickly to Broly before sprinting toward the exit. Within seconds, the chamber had nearly emptied, only a few council members and temple staff remaining. Broly's aura flared bright with agitation. People were hurt, in danger. Every combat instinct demanded he respond, that he use his power to help. But where? How? He lacked context, language, understanding of this world's systems. He turned to Mace with desperate expression. The Jedi Master understood immediately. You want to help, to save people. Broly nodded emphatically. Mace calculated rapidly. Taking Broly into a chaotic emergency could backfire spectacularly. But refusing to let him act, after he had shown such growth and control, would damage the fragile trust they had built. And honestly, a being who could move at supersonic speeds and lift incredible weights could save lives conventional responders could not reach. If you come with me, Mace said firmly, you follow my lead exactly. You don't engage threats unless I tell you to. You focus on rescue, not combat. Understood? Another emphatic nod. Broly's entire posture radiated eagerness to prove he could use his power for something other than destruction. Master Windu, Ki-Adi-Mundi objected. This is reckless. He's untested in civilian situations. Then it's time he was tested in the situation that matters most, Mace countered, already moving toward the exit. Coming, Broly? The Saiyan warrior followed, his massive strides eating distance. They reached the temple's launch platform, where speeders waited. Mace commandeered a two-seat model, but it was immediately obvious Broly would never fit. Can you fly alongside? Mace asked. Follow my speeder? In response, Broly's aura flared and he lifted off the platform, hovering easily. Flight, at least, required no translation. They launched together, speeder and Saiyan, racing through Coruscant's traffic lanes toward the column of smoke rising from the Senate District. As they flew, Mace's communicator provided updates. A bomb had detonated in a crowded plaza. Secondary explosions had collapsed a transit station, hundreds trapped. Emergency services overwhelmed. The situation was desperate. It was also, though no one yet knew, about to become more complicated. Because the terrorist cell responsible for the attack had been monitoring unusual arrivals at the temple, and they had decided that capturing or killing the alien being would make a spectacular statement about Republic vulnerability. Forces were moving, plans converging, and Broly was about to face his greatest test yet, using his power not to fight warriors, but to save innocents while being targeted by those who saw his compassion as exploitable weakness. The galaxy's balance trembled, waiting to see which way the scale would tip, whether power would ultimately serve destruction or salvation, whether a soul could be redeemed, or if trauma's gravity was simply too strong to escape. The answer would be written in fire and choice across Coruscant's gleaming towers, and it would begin with a single decision: to save or to rage, to be the weapon or to be the person. Broly chose. The Senate District Plaza had been transformed into a landscape of horror and heroism intermingled. The initial explosion had ripped through the central fountain during midday rush, when thousands of beings traversed the open space between government buildings. Bodies lay scattered among shattered permacrete and twisted metal. The secondary collapse of the transit station had created a crater 30 meters across, its edges unstable and threatening further devastation. Rescue workers in emergency orange scrambled through the debris, their efforts hampered by continued structural failures and the ever-present threat of additional devices. Mace's speeder descended onto a hastily established perimeter, Republic security forces waving him through immediately upon recognizing Jedi markings. Broly landed beside him with enough force to crack pavement, drawing weapons toward him reflexively before Mace raised a hand. "He's with me," the Jedi Master commanded, his authority brooking no argument. "Where do you need us most?" The incident commander, a battle-scarred Zabrak female, pointed toward the transit station crater. "Lower levels. We're reading life signs, but the structure's too unstable. Every time we send crews down, sections collapse. We've lost 2 teams already." Her voice cracked slightly on the last words. Professional composure strained past breaking. Mace's jaw tightened. Unstable structures meant conventional rescue was nearly impossible, but someone who could support tons of weight while moving at high speed might accomplish what equipment could not. "Broly, can you shore up falling sections while others evacuate survivors?" The Saiyan warrior studied the crater, his enhanced senses penetrating deeper than normal vision. He detected heat signatures beneath the rubble. 17 distinct life forms, some strong, others fading. Structural weakness where weight concentrated wrong. The problem was 3-dimensional and dynamic, requiring constant adjustment as rescue efforts changed load distribution. His father would have commanded him to extract maximum destruction from this scenario, to collapse everything, bury the evidence, eliminate complications. But that was his father's voice, his father's choice, his father's horror. Broly made a different choice. He leaped into the crater, his descent controlled enough to avoid causing additional damage. Landing on a section of partially collapsed ceiling, he immediately sensed the strain through his feet. The metal groaned, concrete powdered. He spread his stance and let ki flow through his body into the structure beneath him, his energy acting as a stabilizing framework. The groaning stopped. The collapse halted. Broly had become a living support beam. Rescue workers stared in astonishment, then training overtook shock. They scrambled into the newly stabilized section, moving toward the life signs with professional efficiency. Mace descended via grapple line, his lightsaber ignited to provide light and a cutting tool for debris. "Talk to me, people. What do we have?" "Family of 4, trapped under transit car," one rescuer called. "Can't lift it, too heavy, and pinned by structural elements." Broly shifted his weight, testing whether he could move without destabilizing his section. The structure complained but held. He approached the trapped car, a massive hunk of metal designed to carry 200 passengers, now crumpled and wedged into the rubble. 4 beings huddled beneath it, a Twi'lek couple and their young children, faces pale with shock and bleeding from various injuries. The Saiyan warrior gripped the car's edge and pulled. Metal shrieked, support beams twisted, but slowly, inexorably, the multi-ton vehicle rose. Broly's aura flared bright as he channeled more ki into the effort, his muscles swelling, veins standing out like cables. He lifted the car completely free, holding it above his head, while rescue workers dragged the family clear. "Got them, clear." The call came. Broly hurled the car away from the survivors, its bulk crashing into an already destroyed section where it could harm no one. Then he moved to the next signature, an elderly human male pinned beneath a support column. Broly lifted the column, held it steady until rescuers extracted the victim, then carefully lowered it to avoid creating new instabilities. Pattern established, he moved through the crater like a force of nature bent to humanitarian purpose. Lifting, stabilizing, creating safe paths. His power, which had leveled mountains and shattered armies, became a tool of preservation. Each life saved felt strange, validating, as if his existence could mean something other than body counts and his father's satisfaction. Mace worked alongside him, cutting through obstacles, using the Force to sense survivors buried too deep for conventional detection. The Jedi Master noted how Broly adapted dynamically, learning structural engineering through immediate tactile feedback. The Scion began predicting where sections would fail, positioning himself to prevent collapses before they occurred rather than reacting after. Remarkable, Mace murmured to himself. He's not just strong, he's intelligent, observant, everything his father tried to suppress. But on the plaza surface, darker currents were moving. The terrorist cell responsible for the bombing watched through commandeered security feeds, noting the alien beings' involvement. Their leader, a human extremist named Krell, who believed the Republic had grown weak through alien integration, saw opportunity. That creature is vulnerable while focused on rescue, he told his squad. We detonate the reserve charges now, collapse the entire section, blame him for the additional deaths, prove that bringing alien contamination into Republic space creates chaos. His second-in-command hesitated. Sir, there are still civilians down there. Our civilians. Humans. Krell's expression was cold. Martyrs for the cause. The Republic must learn that alien influence kills, one way or another. He triggered the detonator. 6 additional bombs erupted simultaneously throughout the crater's perimeter, placed during the confusion following the initial attack. The explosions were precisely calibrated to cause maximum structural failure, turning the crater into a kill box from which no conventional exit existed. Broly sensed the detonations a microsecond before they occurred, his combat instincts reading the electronic signatures. He released the beam he had been supporting and threw himself toward the nearest cluster of rescue workers, his body becoming a shield as the shockwave rolled over them. Flames and force that should have liquefied flesh broke against his aura instead, heat and pressure dissipating around his protective field. But he could only shield those immediately near him. Other sections collapsed catastrophically. Screams cut short as tons of debris fell. Life signs that had been stable a moment before winked out with terrible finality. Mace felt each death through the Force, a chorus of endings that struck him like physical blows. He staggered, nearly fell, caught himself against a beam. No, he whispered. No, no, no. Broly's aura exploded to blinding intensity, rage and pain and guilt swirling into a maelstrom. He had been saving them, had been proving he could build instead of destroy, and someone had made it meaningless, had killed them anyway, had turned his moment of hope into more death, more failure, more confirmation that his power attracted only catastrophe. The green energy began crackling with darker currents, Ki responding to emotional turmoil. His eyes shifted from brown to white gold, pupils disappearing as the legendary Super Saiyan transformation clawed toward full manifestation. The remaining structure groaned under the pressure of his aura alone, reality itself seeming to thin around the epicenter of his rage. Broly. Mace's voice cut through the chaos, sharp with desperate authority. I know what you're feeling. I feel it too. They murdered innocents. But if you lose control now, you finish what the terrorists started. You prove them right. Is that what you want? The Saiyan's head turned toward him, and Mace saw someone balanced on a precipice between person and annihilation. Every trauma, every pain, every moment of being blamed for destruction his father engineered, all of it crystallized into a single moment of choice. Be the weapon. Prove the fear justified. Let rage decide. Or be the person. Prove that choice mattered more than conditioning. Let compassion survive despite all reason to abandon it. They'll blame you, Mace continued, his voice raw with shared grief. They'll say you caused this, that your presence triggered it, and you have every right to rage against that injustice. But rage won't bring back the dead. It will just create more of them. So, I'm asking you, as someone who believes in you, to choose differently. Help me save whoever's left. Then we hunt the ones responsible, together, with justice, not revenge." Broly stood frozen, his aura fluctuating wildly, the transformation hovering at threshold. Everything in him screamed to erupt, to find the terrorists and paint the plaza with their remains, to make someone pay for this violation. But Mace believed in him, had called him a person, had trusted him. And that trust was the only thing in Broly's entire existence that felt more real than rage. Slowly, incrementally, the golden light receded from his eyes. The aura dimmed from blinding to bright. His breathing steadied from explosive gasps to controlled cycles. The transformation retreated, power pulled back into the core where discipline held it. He had chosen. Again, and this time, the choice had cost him something precious. The satisfaction of unleashing justified fury. "Good," Mace said, his own relief palpable. "Now let's finish the rescue. Every life we save is an answer to what happened here." They worked through the night, Broly serving as mobile infrastructure, while Jedi and rescue workers extracted survivors from increasingly precarious positions. The death toll was horrific, 217 confirmed, with dozens more critical. But without Broly's intervention, the secondary collapse would have killed everyone in the crater. Hundreds lived because he chose restraint over rage. As dawn broke over Coruscant, painting the towers in shades of amber and rose, the last survivor was lifted from the rubble. A human child, no more than 5, found in an air pocket that should not have existed. Broly had unconsciously maintained that pocket throughout the night, his ki flowing around the child even while he worked elsewhere, an instinct toward protection operating beyond conscious thought. The child's mother, already evacuated and treated, wept as she was reunited with her daughter. She approached Broly, who stood exhausted and covered in dust and blood, and simply pressed her hand against his leg, unable to reach higher. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for saving her." Broly looked down at her, at the genuine gratitude despite his monstrous appearance and the fear he generated. Something inside him cracked, then broke, then began reforming into a different shape. He had saved someone, had been thanked, had been touched without fear or agenda. The moment was small, almost nothing compared to the scale of destruction his life had witnessed, but it rewrote fundamental equations. "Welcome," he managed, the words rough but sincere. The woman smiled through her tears and rejoined her daughter. Broly watched them go, his expression mixing wonder and grief and tentative hope. Mace approached, placing his hand on Broly's arm. "The council will want a full debrief. There will be questions, concerns, probably accusations. But I want you to know something before we face them. What you did here today, the choice you made when everything in you wanted to rage, that's the act of a Jedi. Not in technique or training, but in spirit. You protected the innocent, chose compassion over revenge, and I'm honored to stand beside you." The Saiyan warrior had no words for the emotion washing through him, so he simply nodded, trusting that Mace understood what could not be spoken. But before they could return to the temple, a Republic security officer approached with urgent news. "Master Windu, we've identified the terrorist cell. Tracked them to a warehouse in the industrial sector. Tactical teams are mobilizing, but they're requesting Jedi support. These individuals are clearly willing to die for their cause." Mace's expression hardened. Here was the next test. Could Broly face the ones responsible for the bombing without losing himself to vengeance? Could justice be pursued without becoming execution? "Assemble the team," Mace said. "We'll move in 1 hour. But I have specific requirements for how this operation proceeds." He began outlining a plan that would give Broly a role while constraining opportunities for violence to erupt. If they could capture the terrorists rather than kill them, if Broly could face his would-be murderers and still choose non-lethal force, it would answer the Council's concerns definitively. But it would also place incredible burden on a being still learning what restraint meant. still discovering that power could serve purposes beyond the ones his father had burned into his identity. The sun rose higher, painting the devastation in stark light. In the temple, the council convened to debate what the night had proven. On the streets, citizens whispered about the massive alien who had held collapsing structures while rescue workers saved their loved ones. And in the industrial sector, a group of extremists fortified their position, unaware that their actions had set in motion forces they could not comprehend. The galaxy turned, choices accumulated, and Broly stood at the center of a transformation that would define not just his own fate, but the question of whether power itself could be redeemed. The answer awaited in the shadows of the warehouse district, where justice and vengeance would face each other across an impossible divide, and where a soul would prove what it had become. The industrial sector existed in Coruscant's lower levels, where natural light never reached and the air tasted of metal and recycled atmosphere. Factories here produced the mundane materials that kept a planet city functioning: durasteel beams, circuit boards, atmospheric processors. The workers who labored in these facilities rarely saw the gleaming towers they built and maintained, their entire lives conducted in perpetual fluorescent twilight. The warehouse the terrorists had chosen for their final stand occupied a particularly desolate section, surrounded by defunct manufacturing plants and empty storage facilities. Its strategic value was obvious: multiple exits, sightlines allowing early warning of approach, and thick walls that would complicate both scanning and assault. Krell had selected it precisely because he understood Republic tactical doctrine and had planned counters for every conventional response. What he had not planned for was Broly. Mace's assault team assembled in a commandeered factory 3 blocks distant, 20 Republic tactical officers in full armor, their weapons loaded with stun rounds rather than lethal ordnance. 6 Jedi, including Masters Plo Koon and Shark T, present both to provide support and to observe Broly's conduct under combat conditions. The Scion warrior stood slightly apart from the main group, his presence creating a bubble of space that others unconsciously maintained. The primary objective is capture, not termination, Mace addressed the group, his tone brooking no deviation. These individuals have committed atrocities and will face justice. But we are not executioners. We are the Republic's defenders, and we defend its values as much as its people. One of the tactical officers, a grizzled veteran named Tor, spoke carefully. Master Windu, with respect, these terrorists have proven willing to murder civilians en masse. If they resist, lethal force may be the only option to prevent further casualties. If lethal force becomes necessary, we will employ it, Mace acknowledged. But it will be the last resort, not the first. Clear? Murmured acknowledgments circulated through the group. Then Shark T stepped forward, her attention on Broly. "And what is his role?" she asked, gesturing to the Saiyan. "His power makes conventional tactics irrelevant, but his control remains questionable." Mace had anticipated this challenge. "Broly will serve as our breach element and shield. He'll create entry points where needed and protect our advance from enemy fire. What he will not do is engage in offensive combat unless absolutely necessary to save lives." "Broly, can you do this?" The massive warrior nodded, though his aura flickered with tension. The beings they pursued had killed innocents, had turned his moment of redemption into another massacre. Every instinct cultivated through a lifetime of violence demanded he make them suffer, make them understand the pain they had inflicted. But Mace believed he was more than instinct, and Broly was beginning to believe it too. "Remember," Mace said quietly, moving to stand beside him, "they want you to lose control. It validates their narrative. Every moment you maintain restraint, you prove them wrong. That's a victory more complete than any physical dominance could achieve." Broly's jaw tightened, but he nodded again. He understood, or was trying to understand. The distinction between justice and vengeance remained abstract, something he felt toward but could not quite grasp. But trust was concrete. Mace had earned trust, and trust created obligation. The assault team moved out in coordinated silence, their formation designed to minimize detection while maintaining mutual support. As they approached the target warehouse, Broly's enhanced senses detected the defensive preparations. Explosives rigged to primary entrances, snipers positioned on internal catwalks, force fields sealing certain corridors. The terrorists had transformed the space into a killing ground. Plo Koon's masked voice crackled over the comm. Conventional entry will result in significant casualties. Master Windu, perhaps we should request siege equipment, which gives them time to execute hostages or detonate additional devices. Mace countered. No, we go now, but we go smart. Broly, the northeastern wall. Can you create an entrance without bringing down the structure? The Saiyan studied the indicated section, his key senses probing material composition and load-bearing vectors. He nodded affirmatively, then approached the wall with measured steps. His fist cocked back, ki condensing around it in bright green luminescence. The strike, when it came, was precisely calibrated. Not maximum force, but exactly sufficient force applied at the optimal angle. The durasteel wall cratered inward, creating a 3-meter opening without triggering structural collapse. Broly had essentially performed instant, kinetic demolition. He stepped through first, his massive frame filling the breach, his body deliberately positioned to block return fire. Blaster bolts immediately rained down from the catwalks, red energy splashing against his aura and dissipating. The tactical team poured through behind him, their return fire suppressive rather than lethal, driving the snipers into cover. Jedi ignited lightsabers, their blades forming defensive patterns that caught any shots penetrating Broly's shield. Krell's voice boomed from overhead speakers, amplified and distorted. The Republic sends its alien pet to do its dirty work. Proof of the contamination we fight against. Kill the creature. Show them what purity looks like. Broly's aura flared dangerously at the word pet, his father having used similar language to justify the control crown, but Mace's hand touched his arm, a point of contact that said, "I'm here. You're not alone. Stay focused." The team advanced through the warehouse's maze of storage containers and industrial equipment, Broly clearing paths by simply walking through obstacles too heavy for others to move. They encountered resistance at key choke points, but the combination of Jedi deflection and Broly's mobile cover negated the terrorists' advantages. 3 explosive traps detonated, but Broly's reflexes allowed him to intercept the shockwaves, his body becoming a blast shield for those behind him. "He's protecting us," Tor muttered to his squadmate, audible surprise in his voice. "The creature's protecting us." "Not a creature," Mace corrected sharply. "His name is Broly, and he's a warrior choosing to defend rather than destroy. Remember that distinction." They reached the central chamber where the terrorists had fortified their final position. 15 individuals in tactical gear surrounded Krell, their weapons trained on the entrance. Behind them, 3 hostages, civilian workers who had the misfortune of being in the warehouse when it was seized. The strategic situation was classic: surrender or we execute innocents. Mace assessed options rapidly. Direct assault risked hostage lives. Negotiation with fanatics rarely succeeded. The standoff could stretch for hours, time during which anything might happen. They needed a solution that incapacitated the terrorists too quickly for retaliation. He looked at Broly, and an idea formed. Risky, unprecedented, but potentially perfect. "Can you move faster than they can pull triggers?" Mace asked quietly. Broly considered, running combat calculations that had been instinct since before memory. 15 targets, spaced in defensive arc, weapons trained forward. If he moved at full speed, the time between initiating motion and disarming all 15 would be measured in microseconds, but microseconds still allowed for reflexive firing unless he could surprise them. Make them hesitate just long enough. An idea occurred to him, brutal in its psychological elegance. He nodded to Mace, then stepped into the open, arms spread wide, aura completely suppressed. He made himself the largest possible target, utterly vulnerable, radiating an invitation to violence. "Take the shot," Krell screamed. "Kill it." The terrorists opened fire, dozens of bolts lancing toward Broly's exposed chest. and for one terrible instant, the watching Jedi thought they were witnessing an execution. Then Broly moved. He accelerated to speeds that made him effectively invisible, his body becoming a green blur that defied conventional tracking. Each terrorist suddenly found themselves disarmed, their weapons torn from their grips with such force that several suffered broken fingers. Broly had not struck them, had not killed them, had simply removed their means of violence in the time it took neurons to fire. He reappeared at the chamber's center, arms full of confiscated weapons, his expression showing intense concentration. He had wanted to hurt them. Every instinct had screamed to break bones, crush throats, make them pay for the lives they had taken. But he had made a promise, had chosen a different path, so he settled for their terror instead of their destruction. The effect was profound. 15 hardened extremists collapsed into fear-induced paralysis, confronting a being whose power so exceeded their understanding that resistance became meaningless abstraction. Several wept. Others simply shut down, minds unable to process what had occurred. Only Krell maintained composure, his fanaticism providing insulation from reality. He produced a thermal detonator from his vest, thumbing the activation switch. "You think you've won?" he spat. "I die. This goes off. Everyone dies. The Republic learns nothing is safe while alien filth walks among us." Mace's hand moved toward his lightsaber, but Broly was faster. The Saiyan crossed the distance in a single step, his massive hand enveloping Krell's entire arm. He squeezed, carefully calibrating pressure, until the terrorist's grip loosened and the detonator fell. Broly caught it with his other hand, cradled it gently, then deactivated it with surprising delicacy. Krell stared up at him, all bravado evaporating, leaving only a broken man who had poured his hatred into a cause that had ultimately proven hollow. "You're an abomination," he whispered. "You shouldn't exist." Broly's eyes met his, and for once, words came clearly. "Said about you too someday, when people remember what you did." The simple truth of it broke Krell completely. He sagged in Broly's grip, not unconscious but defeated in ways physical restraint could never achieve. The tactical team secured all prisoners with efficient professionalism. The hostages were freed, shaken but unharmed. Shakti approached Broly with expression that had shifted from wariness to something approaching awe. "You could have killed them all," she said quietly. "Could have torn this building apart and buried everyone under rubble. Instead, you chose the harder path, the path of restraint and mercy. That is not the action of a monster or a weapon. That is the action of someone with wisdom and compassion." Broly had no response beyond a slight nod, but the words settled into him like seeds into fertile soil. Wisdom, compassion. No one had ever associated those qualities with him before. They had named him monster, weapon, abomination, aberration. But never wise, never compassionate. Perhaps they had been wrong, or perhaps he was becoming something they could not have predicted. Mace placed his hand on Broly's shoulder, a gesture of profound respect between equals. "The Council will hear a full account of what happened here, and I will make sure they understand that you've proven yourself beyond any reasonable doubt. You belong in the galaxy, Broly, not as a weapon, not as a danger, but as a protector." The journey back to the temple passed in contemplative silence, the assault team processing what they had witnessed. When they arrived, the hangar was packed with council members, temple staff, and dozens of Jedi who had heard rumors of the operation. All eyes tracked Broly as he disembarked, his massive frame moving with surprising gentleness among the crowd. Yoda stood at the center of the assembly, leaning heavily on his staff, his ancient eyes studying the Saiyan with fresh perspective. "Report, Master Windu will give. But first, a question for our guest I have." The small master approached Broly directly, utterly unafraid despite the vast power differential. "Angry, you must be. Hurt, blamed for suffering you tried to prevent. Yet violence you chose not. Why? When justified it would have been, when satisfaction it would have brought." Why choose restraint? Broly looked down at the tiny figure who somehow radiated authority exceeding size. He struggled to find words adequate to the question, his limited facility with language insufficient for the complexity of what he felt. Finally, simply, he said, "Mace trusts. Would not Dotbreak trust?" Yoda's ears perked fully upright, and his expression softened with something approaching paternal pride. Trust, the foundation of all virtue, that is. Without trust, no teaching can take root. Without trust, power remains dangerous. But with trust, even the greatest power can serve the light. He turned to address the assembled Jedi. Learn from this, we should. Fear, we showed this being. Suspicion. Yet one Jedi offered trust instead. And in trust, transformation began. A lesson for us all, that is. The crowd murmured, their perspective shifting visibly. They had seen the footage from the rescue operation, had heard the testimonies of the tactical team, had witnessed Broly's restraint in the face of profound provocation. Evidence accumulated, and with it, fear transmuted into tentative acceptance. Ki Adi-Mundi stepped forward, his earlier skepticism tempered by honesty. "I was wrong, Broly. I judged you as a threat without understanding that threat and danger are not synonymous. You could be dangerous and chose not to be. That choice defines you far more than your power level. The Council owes you apology, and I offer mine freely." Other voices joined in agreement, a cascade of recognition that this being they had feared was in fact someone worthy of protection and support rather than containment and exile. It was not universal acceptance, not yet. Some still harbored concerns. But the tide had turned decisively. Plo Koon approached with a carefully wrapped bundle. "The quartermaster has prepared proper garments for you, temple robes, adjusted for your size, if you wish to wear them. If you wish to stay and learn what we can teach." Broly took the bundle with reverent care, understanding the symbolism. Clothes were identity, belonging. His father had kept him in armor, always armor, forever the weapon. But these were robes, the garments of students and teachers, of people who pursued understanding. He looked to Mace, seeking permission or guidance, or simply reassurance that accepting was the right choice. The Jedi Master smiled and nodded. "You've earned your place here, Broly. Not through power, but through the choices you've made despite that power. I would be honored to continue training you if you'll have me as your teacher." The word teacher resonated through Broly's being like a bell struck in a temple. Not controller, not handler, not master in the sense his father had claimed, but teacher. Someone who would guide rather than dominate, who would develop his potential rather than fear it. He nodded, clutching the robes to his chest. Then, with effort that showed in every syllable, he managed, "Thank you, we'll learn. We'll be better." "You're already better than you were yesterday," Mace replied. "That's all growth ever is. Today better than yesterday, tomorrow better than today. The path is endless, but that's what makes it beautiful." The assembly dispersed slowly, Jedi returning to their duties with new stories to tell. Broly followed Mace to quarters that had been hastily prepared in one of the temple's larger chambers, a space designed for visiting dignitaries of unusual size. It was sparse but clean, with a sleeping platform reinforced to handle his weight and a meditation area overlooking Coruscant's glittering expanse. "Rest," Mace instructed. "We'll begin formal training tomorrow, but for now, simply exist without expectation or demand. You've earned that peace." Broly nodded and entered his quarters, closing the door gently despite his hands being capable of tearing it from its frame. He stood at the window for a long time, watching the endless flow of traffic outside, the millions of lives pursuing their individual purposes in the great tapestry of civilization. He had spent his entire existence as a singularity, isolated by power and trauma. But perhaps isolation was not inevitable. Perhaps connection was possible, even for someone whose nature seemed to preclude it. The Force, which had pressed against him since his arrival in this galaxy, finally found a way to touch him, not to control or invade, but simply to acknowledge. The cosmic energy recognized what Broly had become, not an anomaly to be corrected, but a new note in its infinite song. And somewhere, in the space between dimensions, between the key that defined Saiyan power and the force that shaped this reality, a bridge formed, fragile, unprecedented, but real. Broly, for the first time in his life, felt something approximating hope, not the desperate, manic hope of someone clinging to fantasy, but the quiet hope of someone who had seen evidence that change was possible, that the future did not have to repeat the past, that the weapon could choose to become something else. He slept, and his dreams held no nightmares. Only the memory of a child's mother touching his leg and saying thank you. Only the weight of Mace's hand on his shoulder, conveying trust and respect. Only the sound of his own voice saying words his father had tried to burn away, "Will be better." The galaxy turned, indifferent to individual struggles, but the Force noted with interest that something impossible had occurred. A soul had been reached. A transformation had begun. And from such small seeds, the future grew in directions even prophecy could not predict. In the council chamber, Yoda meditated on what he had witnessed, his centuries of experience providing context for the unprecedented. "A balance, perhaps," he murmured to the empty room. "Too much light, rigidity creates. Too much dark, chaos reigns. But between them, in the space where choice lives, their power serves life instead of death. Hope in unexpected places, the Force shows us. Listen, we must." The ancient master's words faded into contemplative silence, carrying wisdom that would shape decisions yet to come. But for now, for this moment, the lesson was simple. Trust and choice could redeem what fear and control had broken. And a being named Broly, who had come to this galaxy as a weapon, was learning to become a person. The beginning, not the ending, this was, but what beginning could be more important than the one where power learned compassion, and compassion proved stronger than any force in the cosmos. The weeks that followed Broly's arrival at the temple unfolded with a rhythm foreign to his previous existence. Structure without cruelty, training without torture, challenge without condemnation. Each morning began with meditation in his quarters, as Coruscant's artificial sun brightened the eastern sky. Mace had taught him to sit with stillness, not to suppress his power, but to exist alongside it consciously, recognizing its presence without being consumed by its demands. The practice felt impossible initially. His mind, fractured by trauma and the crown's neural suppression, could not quiet easily. Thoughts raced like predators circling prey. His father's voice, the screams of planets he had destroyed, the weight of bodies in the Senate District rubble, the faces of beings who had feared him. But Mace's patient instruction provided anchoring technique. Focus on breath. Notice thoughts without engaging them. Return attention to the present moment. Slowly, incrementally, Broly learned that consciousness could exist in states other than combat readiness or explosive rage. The discovery was profound. Physical training occupied mid-mornings in the temple's most reinforced facilities. Sindralig served as primary instructor, having developed genuine respect for the Saiyan's learning capacity. They worked on restraint rather than strength, precision rather than power. Broly practiced manipulating increasingly fragile objects, catching thrown eggs without breaking them, assembling intricate machinery with fingers that could crush durasteel, learning to modulate his touch across microscopic gradients of force. "You're teaching me weakness," Broly had said one day, his vocabulary expanding rapidly through constant exposure and Mace's patient tutoring. "I'm teaching you range," Dralig corrected. "A warrior who can only strike at maximum force is predictable, limited. But a warrior who can choose anywhere along the spectrum from gentle to devastating, that warrior is truly dangerous because unpredictable. Your strength remains absolute. Now you're learning when not to use it." The distinction resonated. His father had taught binary options, destroy or be destroyed, dominate or be dominated. But these Jedi offered a third path, strength in service of choice rather than compulsion. Afternoons brought academic education. Master Jocasta Nu took personal interest in filling the vast gaps in Broly's knowledge. She taught him galactic history, the rise and fall of civilizations, the Jedi Order's millennia-spanning mission to serve the Force. She introduced him to literature, philosophy, ethics, concepts like justice, mercy, proportional response. Ideas his father had deliberately withheld because educated weapons were harder to control. Broly absorbed it all with desperate intensity, his mind proving far more capable than his father had allowed. He learned to read basic fluently within 3 weeks, began studying other languages, devoured texts on physics, mathematics, biology. Understanding the universe felt like discovering color after a lifetime of grayscale. "You have a beautiful mind," Jocasta told him during one session, her elderly face warm with genuine affection. "I know your father tried to reduce you to instinct and rage, but intelligence, this profound, cannot be suppressed, only delayed. Now that it's free, I expect you'll surpass many Jedi in pure academic achievement." The praise created unfamiliar sensations: pride without arrogance, satisfaction without needing to prove dominance, being valued for something other than destructive capacity. Evenings belonged to Mace exclusively. They would walk the temple gardens, a meticulously maintained space where flora from 1,000 worlds grew in careful harmony. Here, Mace taught the deeper philosophical dimensions of Force mastery. The light side's emphasis on selfless service, the dark side's seductive promise of unlimited power, and the eternal tension between them. "The Force flows through all living things," Mace explained during one such walk, his hand trailing across a flowering bush from Alderaan. "It connects us, binds the galaxy together. When we act from compassion and justice, we strengthen those connections. When we act from hatred and fear, we fray them. Every choice either builds or damages the cosmic fabric." Broly struggled with these abstract concepts, his mind more comfortable with physical laws than metaphysical principles. "But Force not in me same way. My power from within, not from outside." "True," Mace acknowledged. "Your ki operates differently than how most beings interface with the Force. But that doesn't make you separate from the cosmic balance. Your choices still ripple outward. Your power still affects the fundamental patterns. Perhaps you don't channel the Force conventionally, but you exist within its framework. That creates relationship and responsibility." They discussed Varpad, Mace's controversial fighting style that deliberately drew on darkness without succumbing to it. The Jedi Master demonstrated, his movements flowing between serene control and aggressive ferocity seamlessly. "I walk the edge," he said. "I have to understand darkness to counter it. But I never let it define me. Each time I engage the dark side, I risk falling. But the alternative is refusing to confront what threatens the innocent." The parallel to Broly's situation was obvious. Refusing to use his power meant allowing preventable harm. Using it carelessly meant becoming the monster his father had named him. The balance point was narrow, demanding constant attention. "How you not fall?" Broly asked, the question carrying existential weight. "How you touch darkness and stay yourself?" Mace stopped walking and met the Scion's eyes directly. "Anchors. Things that remind me who I am beyond my power. The Jedi Code, my students. The memory of those I've saved and those I've failed. And honestly, fear. Not fear of others, but fear of what I might become if I slip. That fear keeps me careful without making me paralyzed." The answer was not reassuring in conventional sense, but its honesty made it valuable. Redemption was not destination but process, requiring eternal vigilance and self-awareness. During the 4th week, Yoda invited Broly to private meditation session in the Room of 1,000 Fountains, a vast chamber where water and plant life created naturally contemplative atmosphere. The ancient Jedi Master sat on a moss-covered stone, his small frame somehow commanding the entire space's attention. "Sit, you will," Yoda instructed, gesturing to a flat boulder suitable for Broly's size. The Scion obeyed, folding his massive frame into approximation of meditation posture. The fountain's gentle sounds filled silence between them, creating rhythm that invited stillness. "A question I have," Yoda began. "Forgiveness. Understand this concept, do you?" Broly's jaw tightened, his aura flickering briefly. "Father not deserve forgiveness. What he did, who he made me. Not forgivable." "Asked not if he deserved," Yoda corrected gently. "Asked if you understand the concept. For yourself, not for him. Forgiveness is not saying the harm was acceptable. Is saying the harm will no longer control your future. Is choosing freedom from the past's gravity." The distinction was subtle but profound. Broly sat with it, turning the idea over in his mind like an unfamiliar tool whose purpose was not immediately clear. His father's shadow had defined every moment of his existence. Every rage, every destruction, every moment of self-loathing traced back to the control crown and the message it communicated. You are too dangerous to exist freely, too broken to trust, too monstrous to love. "Not know how," Broly admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "Anger is all I know when I think of him. Without anger, what is there?" "Grief," Yoda said simply. "Beneath the anger, grief lives. Grief for the childhood stolen, for the love never given, for the person you might have been if raised with compassion instead of fear. Anger protects against feeling that grief, but grief, when finally felt, can heal what anger only perpetuates." Tears began streaming down Broly's face, his massive frame shaking with sobs that came from depths he had not known existed. Yoda did not attempt to comfort or diminish the weeping. He simply sat in witness, offering silent companionship, while Broly processed pain that had accumulated across years and dimensions. When the storm finally passed, leaving only exhausted silence, Yoda spoke again. "Proud of you, I am. Courage it takes, to feel rather than destroy, to weep rather than rage. Growth, this is. Real growth." Broly wiped his face with the back of one massive hand, his expression vulnerable in ways that would have been unthinkable months ago. "Will I ever be free of him? Will his voice ever stop? Quieter, it will become," Yoda assured. "Not through forgetting, but through building new memories that speak louder. Every day you choose differently than he programmed, his voice loses power. Eventually, it becomes historical fact rather than present reality. The past, it becomes, instead of the always now." The ancient master rose and approached Broly, placing one small hand on the Saiyan's knee. "A gift the Force has given us. You arrived broken, powerful, dangerous, could have gone many ways. Your story. But in meeting Mace, in choosing trust, in learning restraint, you showed us that transformation is always possible. That no one is beyond redemption if they genuinely wish to change. That power itself is neutral, only its use carries moral weight." Broly looked down at the tiny figure who radiated wisdom earned across 900 years of life. "What if I fail? What if someday rage wins and I hurt people? Then you will face consequences, learn from them, and choose again," Yoda replied. "Perfection, the path does not require. Only honest effort and willingness to repair harm caused. Everyone fails sometimes. The difference is whether failure becomes excuse to stop trying or lesson that refines future choices." The conversation settled into Broly like medicine that burned but healed. He had been shaped to believe that any mistake meant total failure, that imperfection justified absolute control. But Yoda offered different framework. Failure as information rather than judgment, mistake as part of learning rather than proof of irredeemability. It was, Broly realized, what being treated like a person rather than a weapon actually meant. As weeks became months, the temple community gradually integrated Broly into its daily rhythms. Younglings, initially terrified, began approaching him with childlike curiosity once they observed he never responded to provocation with violence. They would ask to touch his arms, marvel at his size, Request demonstrations of strength performed with exaggerated gentleness to avoid frightening them. One youngling, a human girl named Lyra, who reminded Broly painfully of the child he had saved from the Senate District rubble, adopted him as informal guardian. She would seek him out during free periods, chattering about her lessons and frustrations and hopes. Broly mostly listened, his verbal skills still developing, but his presence provided her something valuable, an adult who attended without judgment, who existed in stillness rather than constant motion. "Why you never smile?" Lyra asked one day, her 6-year-old directness cutting through layers of adult politeness. Broly considered the question seriously. "Not learned how. My father, he did not smile. Only angry or afraid." "But you're not with him anymore," Lyra pointed out with child logic's clarity. "You could learn now. I could teach you." She proceeded to demonstrate smiling, her small face contorting through various expressions ranging from genuine warmth to goofy exaggeration. Broly attempted to mirror her, his unfamiliar facial muscles creating results that were more grimace than grin. But Lyra clapped anyway, delighted by his effort. "You'll get better," she assured him. "It takes practice, like Force meditation. Master Yoda says everything takes practice." The interaction left Broly contemplating the profound simplicity of her observation. Everything took practice. Including basic human experiences, his father had denied him: joy, playfulness, connection without agenda. Perhaps the healing process involved not just processing trauma, but also learning skills that should have developed naturally in childhood. He began studying how other beings expressed happiness, observed Jedi laughing together in the dining hall, watched younglings playing in the gardens, noted the way Mace's eyes crinkled when something genuinely amused him, and slowly, incrementally, Broly's own capacity for positive emotion began emerging from the rubble of his conditioning. The first time he laughed, truly laughed rather than just mimicking the sound, occurred during a training session where Sindralig accidentally triggered a stun grenade at his own feet. The Battlemaster's undignified yelp and subsequent scramble for cover struck Broly as absurdly funny. The laughter that erupted from him was rusty, unpracticed, but genuine. It felt like discovering a new color, like unlocking a sense he had not known was missing. Dralig, recovering his dignity, grinned up at the massive Saiyan. "Well, that's a milestone. First laugh. Should probably record the date for posterity." But not all progress was comfortable or linear. Nightmares plagued Broly's sleep, vivid reconstructions of atrocities he had committed under his father's control. He would wake screaming, his aura flaring violently enough to crack walls. Temple staff learned to reinforce his quarters and to approach carefully after such episodes, giving him space to re-establish control. Mace made himself available for these moments, arriving within minutes of being alerted. He would sit with Broly in the aftermath, not attempting to minimize the horror or offer false comfort, simply being present while the Saiyan warrior confronted the weight of his past. "It was not your fault," Mace said during one such vigil, his voice cutting through Broly's self-recrimination. "You were controlled. Your agency was stripped away. The beings who died, that tragedy belongs to your father, not to you." "But my hands," Broly choked out, staring at his palms like they were alien to him. "My power. I killed them. Even if controlled, I did the killing." "Then let their deaths mean something," Mace replied firmly. "Let them be the reason you choose differently now. Every life you save is an answer to every life your father forced you to take. You can't undo the past, but you can ensure the future is different. That's not nothing, Broly. That's redemption." The concept of redemption had become central to Broly's developing understanding of himself. Not redemption as erasure of guilt, but redemption as transformation of meaning. The same power that had destroyed could protect. The same hands that had killed could heal. Not because the past stopped mattering, but because the present offered new possibilities. 6 months into his temple residence, the council formally recognized Broly's progress by offering him provisional status as Jedi learner, an unprecedented category created specifically for his unique situation. He was not a Padawan, as he had not trained from childhood, and his relationship with the Force remained non-traditional. But he was acknowledged as someone actively engaged in mastering himself and his power toward ethical ends. The ceremony was small, witnessed only by the Council and a few close companions. Yoda performed the ritual, his ancient voice carrying weight of institutional authority and personal blessing. Broly, of unknown origin, whose power exceeds easy categorization, whose journey has been pain and survival and finally choice, we recognize you as student of the light. Not because you channel the Force as we do, but because you serve what the Force serves. Life, compassion, balance. May your path continue upward. May your strength serve wisdom. May you find peace. Mace draped a specially commissioned outer robe across Broly's shoulders, deep green fabric that honored his Kai's distinctive color while marking him as temple affiliate. The Saiyan warrior stood silent, overwhelmed by the formality and the meaning. These beings, who had every reason to reject him, instead offered belonging, offered identity beyond destruction, offered proof that his father's judgment had been wrong. "Thank you," he managed, the words inadequate but heartfelt. "We'll honor this. We'll prove worthy." "You already have," Shakti said gently. "This ceremony acknowledges what you've become, not what you must earn." The gathering dispersed into informal celebration, Jedi offering congratulations and support. Broly found himself at the center of community for perhaps the first time in his existence, surrounded by beings who saw him as a person rather than threat or tool. But outside the temple, in the darker corners of Coruscant and beyond, other forces had taken notice of the unusual alien who had disrupted their operations and proven immune to conventional threat. Crime syndicates, Imperial observers, even a few Sith cultists saw opportunity or danger requiring response. They began laying plans, gathering intelligence, preparing strikes. The peace Broly had found was real but fragile. The galaxy cared nothing for his growth or healing. It would test him again, test whether his transformation had roots deep enough to withstand the storms that inevitably came to those who stood in the light. But for this moment, in the temple's serene gardens with Mace at his side and younglings playing in the distance, Broly allowed himself something revolutionary. Hope, not desperate hope, not delusional hope, but the grounded hope of someone who had evidence that change was possible, that the future did not have to repeat the past, that even power born in trauma could eventually serve life. He looked up at Coruscant's artificial sky, watching ships traverse the eternal traffic lanes, and wondered what his father would think if he could see this moment. Would Paragus recognize his son in this being who chose restraint over rage, service over domination, connection over isolation? Or would he dismiss it as weakness, as the very vulnerability he had tried to crush? Broly realized, with sudden clarity, that the answer did not matter. His father's opinion held no more authority over his life. The crown was gone, the control was gone, and what remained was choice, infinitely renewable, perpetually available. He was free. And freedom, he was learning, meant being able to define himself rather than accepting others' definitions. The thought settled into him like the final piece of a vast puzzle, completing a picture he had not known he was assembling. And in completing it, he understood what transformation actually meant. Not becoming different person, but becoming the person who had always existed beneath the imposed identity, waiting for chance to emerge. Broly smiled. Not perfectly, not effortlessly, but genuinely. And the Force, that cosmic energy which touched all things, noted the smile and whispered approval across the galaxy. For in the end, what greater victory could there be than a soul learning to exist beyond trauma, a warrior choosing peace, a weapon becoming a protector? The answer was none. This was the victory, quiet, personal, infinite,